I just buried my husband in a military cemetery more than 6,000 miles from home, where the cold wind cut through rows of straight white headstones and the sound of the bugle still rang in my ears. The funeral ended with a flag neatly folded into a triangle, placed in my hands like a piece of him I was allowed to bring back. The flight back to the US lasted 11 hours, my window seat feeling like a safe distance between me and the rest of the world. I turned on my phone right after the plane left the runway and sent a message to the family group chat, no emojis, no fancy words, just, flight lands at 3 p.m. Can someone pick me up? I didn't think I was asking for much, just a seat in a familiar car after everything I had just been through. The reply came faster than I expected. My brother typed exactly 2 words, use Uber. 2 minutes later, my mother added, why didn't you plan ahead? No, how was the funeral? No, we're sorry we weren't there. No, we're proud of him. Just a cold, empty space between the lines. Welcome to Family Ashes, where family secrets burn to cinders, and the one telling the story is still standing in the wreckage. If you had just lost the most important person in your life, and then discovered your family not only abandoned you but turned away at the moment you needed them most, what would you do? Subscribe to the channel, like the video, and share this story so more people know that sometimes, strangers are the ones willing to become real family. I am Emily Carter, 35 years old, living in Charlotte, North Carolina. My life for the past 10 years has been defined by airport farewells and reunions, by the smell of pressed uniforms that barely had time to hang before being packed away again, by dinners eaten alone and the habit of sleeping with my phone's ringer on all night. My husband, Sergeant Liam Carter, was a U.S. Marine. We were married for 8 years, but the total time we actually spent together was less than half of that. He left, came back, then left again, each return as brief as a pause in a war that never ended. This time, he didn't come back. I got the call at 2 in the morning, the voice of Liam's commanding officer steady and slow, like he had practiced the words hundreds of times. We regret to inform you. I didn't hear the rest, only the sound of my heart pounding and a heavy silence pressing into my ears. They said he fell while on duty in a place most of my family couldn't even pronounce. I flew to Europe for the military funeral. The cemetery stretched white under a gray sky, the rows of headstones standing at perfect attention. The bugle's long notes were so cold it felt like even the wind stopped moving. 3 ceremonial shots cracked through the air, then the folded triangle of the flag was placed in my hands, heavier than anything I'd ever carried. The young Marine standing next to me looked both resolute and quietly apologetic, as if they knew exactly the price I had just paid, and that there would be more like me. When all the formalities ended, I felt my body drain to the point of emptiness. All I wanted was a direct flight back to Charlotte Douglas International Airport, to walk out of the arrivals gate and see a familiar face waiting, saying nothing, just there to take me home. After all that had happened, I didn't think that was too much to hope for. As soon as the plane left the runway, the engine's roar swallowed the cabin noise. I connected to the in-flight Wi-Fi and typed into the family group chat a short, bare message, no emojis, no exclamation marks, no lengthy explanations. Flight lands at 3 p.m. Can someone pick me up? I hit send and set the phone down on the tray table, thinking that was enough. They knew where I had been, what I had done, and who I had lost. They knew I had stood for hours under the heavy gray sky, listening to the bugle's long, freezing notes, feeling the weight of the folded flag in my hands like a piece of Liam's body left for me to carry home. I believed I didn't need to say more, that they would understand, that my request wasn't a demand, just a hand reaching out, hoping to be taken, at least for today. The message had barely left my phone before the screen lit up. Mark, my brother, replied, busy. Use Uber. I blinked, thinking I had read it wrong. 2 short sentences, cold, with no extra words, like a door slammed shut right in my face. I read them again, a second time, a third, hoping that from some angle, the words might soften. But they didn't. They stayed hard, dry, as if I had just asked him to borrow a pair of scissors, not for a ride home from the flight that brought me back after burying my husband. Before I could swallow the lump rising in my throat, my phone buzzed again. 2 minutes later, my mother, Linda, sent another line, why didn't you plan ahead? A question that sounded harmless on the surface but cut straight into me, not because of her tone, but because of the void it left. No, how was your trip? No, was the funeral okay? No, we're proud of him. No words of condolence. Just 2 short, cold messages, as if what I had just been through was a minor inconvenience on the periphery of their day. I sat still, the phone resting in my palm, the screen still glowing. Outside, the sky was a pale, washed-out blue-gray, clouds thick and low, pressing down on the wings of the plane. I felt suspended in the air, not truly here, not belonging to the place I was headed. And in that moment, I began to understand that this flight wasn't just taking me back to Charlotte, it was carrying me into another territory entirely, where the cold didn't come from the wind, but from the people I had once called family. I leaned my head fully against the window, feeling the chill seep through the thin glass, trickling from my temple down my neck and into my chest. Outside, a vast ocean of white clouds stretched endlessly, layer upon layer like frozen waves, drifting silently under the dim winter sun. Usually, at this altitude, the stillness felt like a refuge, a pocket of space removed from traffic, from voices, from anyone's reach. But today, the stillness was thick, heavy as stone, cold enough to squeeze the breath from my lungs. It wasn't peace. It was an unspoken message, I was utterly alone. And I knew the emptiness I felt didn't just come from losing Liam. It came from something else, sharper, slower, a betrayal that had been smoldering for years, waiting for this moment to show itself. Family doesn't always lift you up. Sometimes, they're the ones holding the knife. I opened the chat again. The two messages were still there, as fresh as when they'd arrived, busy. Use Uber. Why didn't you plan ahead? Short to the point of cruelty, so neatly stripped of any warmth it was as if the words had been trimmed to remove every trace of emotion, as though I weren't the daughter who had just buried her husband in a cemetery across the ocean, but someone creating a minor inconvenience in the middle of their busy day. And I wondered, did they realize what they had sent me? Not two answers. A ruthless summary of my place in this family. For years I had tried to believe that the distance and silence were only temporary, that if I truly needed them one day, they would come. I had pictured myself walking out of the arrival's gate, seeing a familiar face, hearing someone say, "Let's go home," and for once, being the one picked up instead of the one finding her own way. But the reality was, when I needed them most, they sent me two clipped sentences and a silence cold as steel. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, the blinking cursor like a heartbeat waiting to be filled. In my head, dozens of sentences lined up, about the heavy flag in my arms, about the bugle's drawn-out notes that froze my chest, about the moment I had to turn and walk away from Liam's grave. I wanted to tell them that none of those things could be planned ahead, that Uber couldn't deliver me from that. But when I pictured that message landing on their screens, I already knew the reaction, silence, or worse, some hollow excuse. I erased everything. A second time. A third. Finally, I left just two words, "It's fine." No period, nothing extra. A sentence that was both a thin shield and a locked door. I hit send, turned my phone face down on the tray table, and let the screen go dark. Outside, the clouds kept drifting, the sky stayed gray-blue. But somewhere deep inside, I felt a part of myself break away, quiet and final. By the time the plane touched down, I knew I would not step off as the same person who had boarded. When the plane's wheels touched down on the runway, the long screech of friction sounded like a reminder I was back in the United States, but I wasn't sure I still had a home to return to. I stood with the line of passengers, pulling my suitcase down the narrow aisle, walking through the long corridor toward baggage claim. Fluorescent lights stretched along the ceiling, the airport PA echoed overhead announcing upcoming flights, the steady roll of suitcase wheels over polished tile blending with the rhythmic shuffle of footsteps. The faint smell of coffee from a distant Starbucks mingled with traces of perfume left on the coats of people who had just passed by. When I reached the carousel, I stood at the edge, letting my eyes sweep over the faces around me. Across the way, a family of four crowded together to grab the father's suitcase, their hands never leaving each other's shoulders. Nearby, a young woman rushed into her boyfriend's arms, laughter tangled with tears lighting up the space around them. A small child ran full tilt into the embrace of a father in a khaki jacket, his tiny shoes slipping on the tile but never letting go. An elderly mother bent to kiss her son returning from a long trip, her shoulders trembling with joy. Each hug, each look, each seemingly ordinary moment landed on me like 100 small pins, warm, but stinging all the same. I pulled my suitcase from the carousel and headed for the exit. No one was waiting. No eyes meeting mine, no nod of recognition, no hand raised in greeting. Only a rush of cold air hit me as the glass door slid open, carrying the dampness of late afternoon. I froze for a moment, feeling as if the entire space outside had just swallowed me whole. Then I saw it. A black Chevrolet Suburban eased to a stop at the passenger pickup, its engine humming low like a deep, steady breath. The door opened, and 3 figures stepped out. 2 women, 1 man. All in immaculate U.S. Marine Corps dress uniforms, jackets buttoned tight, insignia glinting under the airport lights. They walked toward me with sure, deliberate steps, shoulders squared, chin slightly lifted. None of them spoke, but their eyes said it plainly, solemn, steadfast, full of respect. In that instant, amid the noise and chaos of reunions all around, the sight of those 3 Marines moving toward me was like a wall of shields. They cut me free from the feeling of being left behind and replaced it with a presence so strong, it felt like even the cold wind stepped back. They stopped right in front of me, their uniforms so sharp it looked as if every crease had just been pressed. Standing in a straight line, the space between each of them perfectly measured, they held their shoulders firm, chins raised, eyes fixed forward, the gaze of people used to facing storms and gunfire, but today reserved for me, as if to say without a single word, "We are here." In that moment, with the airport's announcements echoing off the ceiling, wheels rattling over tile, laughter and tears spilling all around, the space around me seemed to narrow until all that was left was the sound of their footsteps and the quiet air between us. I tightened my grip on the folded triangle of the flag against my chest, the thick, coarse fabric cutting lightly into my fingertips. It wasn't just a flag. It was the final shape of everything that remained of Liam, neat, dignified, and so heavy it felt as though the weight of an entire life had been pressed into my sternum. I drew in a deep breath, my lungs catching as the sting at the corners of my eyes began to rise. I held it back, not because I feared being seen as weak, but because I knew that if a single tear fell, it would open the floodgate, and I would have no way to gather myself again. From a distance, I caught a bright white light shifting in my direction. A camera lens was trained on us. A cluster of local news reporters stood off to the side, microphones stamped with station logos, video cameras with blinking red lights trained on the scene. I could hear the faint click of shutters, the gentle whir of zoom lenses capturing every detail, my hands locked around the flag, the measured steps of 3 crisp uniforms, the row of brass buttons catching the airport lights. I hadn't sought out the media. I hadn't told anyone outside my family about my flight time. And yet, somehow, they were there, capturing every second of a moment my family didn't know about, or if they did, they hadn't cared enough to show up for, the moment I was no longer entirely alone. And in that moment, I realized there are family who don't share your name, but who will stand beside you like shields, even when blood has turned its back. That night, I returned to my apartment after the city had lit up. The hallway was silent, my footsteps soft against the cold tile floor. I didn't turn on the TV, didn't check social media, didn't even think about watching the news. I just wanted to set my suitcase down, hang up my coat, and let the exhaustion wrap around me like a heavy blanket. But the city kept moving, and just a few hours later, something I hadn't expected appeared in a place everyone could see. The 60-second segment aired in prime time, right after the weather and before the evening sports, that window when families are usually gathered around the dinner table, TV humming in the background. The first image was the black Chevrolet Suburban pulling up to the airport pickup. The door swung open. I stepped out, wrapped head to toe in black, shoulders leaning slightly toward the folded triangle flag pressed tightly against my chest, as if it might vanish if I didn't hold on. Just behind me, 3 Marines in dress blues stood shoulder to shoulder, eyes solemn. Their brass insignia glinted under the airport's fluorescent lights, their polished shoes reflecting the cold floor. The anchor's voice came in, deep and clear, the kind trained to deliver both victories and losses without letting emotion break through. Today, a widow returned home from her husband's overseas military funeral. She was not met by family, but she was not alone. The shot shifted to a white sheet of paper. My handwriting filled the screen in bold blue ink, each stroke steady and deliberate. They read it in full. If you ever find yourself standing alone at the edge of grief, don't look for the ones who left you there. Look for the ones who show up. Signed EC. I didn't see it live, but I could picture it perfectly. In my mother's kitchen, her wine glass might have frozen midair, the liquid inside trembling in small waves. Somewhere in Mark's upscale apartment, a dinner plate might have set down on porcelain with a faint but piercing sound. And in hundreds of living rooms, strangers' eyes would be fixed on the screen, witnessing a story my family had chosen not to be part of, but could no longer avoid becoming a part of. I imagined that moment like an arrow hitting the silence they thought was safe. And I knew that from that second on, silence would no longer be their hiding place. I wasn't in front of a screen to witness it, but the images in my head were so clear I could almost hear the sounds. Somewhere, in my mother's kitchen, when my image appeared on the TV, dressed in black, clutching the folded flag, flanked by 3 immaculate uniforms, her hand froze midair. The red wine glass slipped from her fingers, shattering against the tile, scattering into dozens of shards. The liquid spread, seeping into the kitchen rug, deepening to a dark crimson stain she would never scrub out. Somewhere else, in Mark's high-rise apartment, the TV kept playing, the anchor's voice weaving through the clink of silverware on plates. I pictured him starting to rise from his chair just as the next image appeared, the sheet of paper with EC signed at the bottom and my handwritten words. His phone might have slipped from his hand onto the glass tabletop, the dry thud breaking into a heavy silence. I didn't have to be there to know, because I'd grown used to their reactions when they were forced to face a truth they'd been avoiding for years. Only this time, that truth wasn't delivered in a private message they could ignore. It was broadcast right into their living rooms, at a volume loud enough for the whole world to hear. And I believe, in the moment the wine glass shattered on the tile and the phone hit the table, they understood that this story had slipped beyond their control, and it would never go back to the way it was. I hadn't planned to touch my phone that night. Once my apartment door closed behind me, I just wanted to let everything out there pass by without knowing what kind of story I was becoming to the rest of the world. I hung up my coat, left my suitcase by the wall, and was about to turn on the kettle. But then the ping came, again and again, in quick bursts, like someone knocking urgently at the door. Even face down on the table, my phone cast a faint, blinking light along its edge, like a call I couldn't ignore. When I opened it, the stream of notifications was endless. The airport news segment had been shared hundreds of times in just a few hours. Each repost carried a long chain of comments, and each comment felt like a distant echo, replaying the exact moment my family had chosen not to appear. Strangers wrote about me as if they'd stood there themselves, as if they had felt the same cold rush out of those airport doors that day. One person left a short line, "They didn't pick her up, that's shameful." That comment was instantly flooded with likes, then copied, quoted, and reposted alongside sharper words, "Strangers have more respect than blood. No one should have to come home alone after burying their husband." I kept scrolling, and in the middle of the storm, another post appeared. From my mother. She'd chosen an old photograph, me and Mark as children, maybe 7 or 8, standing close together at a 4th of July parade. I still remembered his hand squeezing mine in the crowd, the drums and brass echoing all around us, sunlight spilling into our hair. The photo had yellowed, the paper curling slightly at the corners, like a memory left too long in a drawer. Her caption was just one sentence, "Family above all, always." I didn't like it. I didn't comment. But the rest of the internet didn't stay quiet. Right below the picture, the first comment, pinned and backed by thousands of likes, was only one line, "Do you remember the day your daughter came home from her husband's funeral, and where you were then?" Short, sharp as a blade, and I knew it had cut straight through the armor my mother wore in front of others. I stared at that line for a long time. I didn't laugh. I didn't cry. I just felt a cold clarity spreading through me, the things I didn't need to say, others would say for me. And this time, I wasn't the only one carrying the truth. The story had slipped out of my hands, becoming something the public had the right to speak on. Those who had turned away now had to stand bare before it, with nowhere to hide, no right to turn their backs as if it had never happened. They would have to hear it, read it, and understand that their silence had become a loud bell, ringing farther and longer than any words I could have spoken. I was sitting at my kitchen table, steam still curling from my mug of tea, when my phone buzzed again. A message from Mark. Not in the group chat, this one was private. 2 lines appeared on the screen. Didn't think it was that serious. "You should have said something." I read each word slowly, as if studying them might change their meaning. But they didn't change. They were still the kind of message that half apologizes while shifting the blame onto me, as if burying my husband halfway across the world and quietly flying home was an event that needed to be scheduled so everyone could plan around it. I set the phone down and wrapped both hands around the mug, feeling the warmth spread through my palms but not enough to loosen the knot in my throat. In my head, I replayed his words, and realized that, no matter how many years we'd been siblings, Mark had never truly seen me as someone who needed protecting. To him, I was just another item on a list of things to handle if there was time. I opened the message again, typed a few words, deleted them. Typed again, deleted again. I could explain. I could tell him everything he'd missed, every bugle note, every rifle shot, every step I took walking away from Liam's grave. But then I realized he didn't need to hear it to understand. He already understood before sending that message, he just didn't want to admit it. In the end, I typed only, "You made your choice." No punctuation, nothing more. A single line that mirrored everything, he hadn't been there, and I would not forget it. I hit send, flipped the phone face down, and let the vibration fade into silence. Outside the window, the night pressed in, and I knew that between me and him, this silence would no longer be temporary. The message from the TV station arrived just 2 days after the 60-second segment aired. At first, I hesitated. I didn't want to turn my loss into something for people to gossip about, and I certainly didn't want to see my name scrolling across a news ticker like some sensational headline. But then I thought about that afternoon at the airport, about the 2 clipped messages from my family, about the hundreds of comments from strangers saying they, too, had come home alone. I understood that silence can sometimes protect you, but it also protects the people who should be held accountable. And this time, I didn't want to stay silent. The taping took place in a small studio, the lights soft, nothing flashy, just a round table and 2 chairs. The host looked at me with eyes gentle enough not to put me on the defensive, but steady enough that I knew I could tell the truth. He asked, "If you could sum up this story in 1 sentence, what would it be?" I sat up straight and took a deep breath. In my mind, I saw the folded flag, the shoulders of the 3 Marines standing behind me, and the cold empty space where my family should have been. My voice, when it came, was steady and unhurried. Blood doesn't make someone family. Showing up does. The words hung in the quiet of the studio, low and deliberate. I saw the host nod slightly, and the cameraman behind the lens paused for a beat before moving again. I knew that even though this program would only last a few minutes, that sentence would last longer, and this time, it would go out whole, untouched, unedited, so that anyone who had ever been abandoned by their own family would know they weren't the only one. I told the whole story from the beginning, without naming anyone, without pointing fingers, without trying to smear or diminish. I kept every detail exactly as it happened, the message I sent, the replies I got, the empty space at the airport, and the 3 uniforms standing where my family should have been. I spoke slowly, so no one would miss a beat, and so I could feel each piece of the truth as I set it down under the lights. When the program aired, I thought it would pass like so many other stories, leaving a few comments and then disappearing. I was wrong. The first emails arrived just hours later. A woman signing only 3 initials wrote that her husband had died in Afghanistan, and she had also returned alone, through the very same airport door I had walked through. An older man, a retired Marine, said he had once witnessed a widow left alone at the arrival's gate and had never forgotten the look in her eyes. And then came more messages, long and short, from across the country, from young widows barely in their 20s to veterans with hair gone completely white. They didn't just share their own stories, they sent words I had never heard from my own blood: "We're proud of you. Thank you for saying what so many have silently endured." Those words didn't mend the old fractures, but they filled the empty spaces in a way I hadn't expected, through the presence of complete strangers who stood beside me as if they had been there all along. The candlelight vigil took place on a winter evening so still that I could hear my own footsteps on the stone tiles of the town square. There was no wind, but the cold seemed to seep up from the ground, through the soles of my shoes, right into my bones. The square in front of City Hall was covered in a soft yellow glow from dozens, then hundreds, of candles placed inside white paper cups. Each cup bore the name of someone who had fallen somewhere far away, leaving an empty space right here in the arms of those still standing. I arrived early, pulling my knit hat down over my ears, wrapping my thick coat tight, standing tucked into a corner of the circle slowly taking shape. No one here knew me, but every small nod, every tired but warm smile from people passing by carried the same unspoken message: "I know what you've lost. And I've lost it too." The announcer began reading the names of service members, one by one, his voice resonant but slow, leaving a long pause after each. I felt my chest tighten with every name, as if each was a small needle touching a wound not yet healed. Then a young girl stepped into the center of the circle, a worn brown guitar in her arms. I thought I'd hear a few simple chords, a plain song. But then the strings rang out, and she began to sing. She sang "I'll Carry You Home." Her voice was clear but trembling, as if each word was being carefully carried so it wouldn't break. The melody moved slowly, seeping into the open air, reaching the deepest places I had tried to lock away. When she drew out the line "I'll carry you home," my vision blurred, the bridge of my nose burned, my throat tightened. I nearly cried, not just because of the song, but because of the unexpected feeling of being held up by someone completely unfamiliar, in the exact moment I had braced myself to stand alone. The candlelight flickered against every face, turning the crowd into a sea of shimmering points, swaying with each breath. And then, at the edge of the circle, between shadow and light, I saw a familiar figure. Mark. He stood back, as if taking one more step forward would make everyone notice him, and he didn't want that. His hands were buried deep in his coat pockets, his shoulders slightly hunched, his eyes not seeking mine but never leaving the scene. He didn't walk over, didn't call my name, just stood there, quiet, far enough away that his presence felt almost uncertain. But I knew he saw everything. He saw strangers gather around me, holding me upright so I wouldn't fall. He saw the glow of hundreds of candles warming a space that he and our mother had left cold. He saw a community standing beside me as though they had been my family all along. And I knew, too, that the distance between us now couldn't be bridged by any apology, no matter how sincere. Some distances aren't measured in feet, but in years and in the moments when someone turned away exactly when they were needed most. After the vigil, I went home through the sharp winter cold, but inside was a warmth I couldn't quite name. Not the kind that erases every gap, but like a small flame, enough to remind me I still had it in me to move forward. All night, the line "I'll carry you home" looped in my head, refusing to leave. I knew I couldn't keep living only inside my own story. I had to do something so that no one else stepping off a plane alone, like I had, would ever have to feel that way again. The next morning, I sat at my kitchen table, opened my laptop, and began writing the first lines of an idea I would later call the Welcome Project. It would be a non-profit dedicated to military widows and widowers returning home alone, not to give flowers or charity handouts, but to offer something that feels small in theory but is everything in that moment: presence. A face at the arrival's gate. A sign with their name. A hug tight enough to say, "You are seen. You are received. You are home." I shared the idea with a group of veterans and friends I'd met at the vigil. The word spread faster than I expected. Within 2 weeks, a local business owner emailed to say he wanted to donate a white van, with warm cloth seats and a wide trunk big enough for luggage and whatever else someone might bring back from halfway across the world. Volunteers signed up from 5 different states, some had worn the uniform, some had once waited for someone who never came home, and some simply wanted to stand beside another person at their most vulnerable moment. Our first welcome event took place at JFK Airport. We arrived early, bundled in thick coats, holding a large white sign in bold letters, "We've got you." When a young woman in black appeared through the arrival's door, clutching a folded triangle flag to her chest, our entire team stepped forward in formation, surrounding her. No one spoke at first. There were only arms wrapping around her, firm squeezes on her shoulders, and the unspoken message in every gaze: "We're here. You are not alone." A passenger happened to capture the moment on their phone. In the video, she paused inside that circle of arms, her head dipping slightly, and the group standing around her formed a wall, shielding her from the airport's noise. The video went online that same night, and by the time I woke the next morning, it had spread across every platform, millions of views, tens of thousands of comments. Someone wrote, "This is the most beautiful reunion I've ever seen, and not a drop of shared blood among them." Another said, "I hope that when my time comes, someone will be there waiting for me like this." Reading those comments, I realized the Welcome Project had already grown far beyond my original idea. It wasn't just an organization anymore. It had become a promise that there will always be someone waiting for you, even if the people you expected most have chosen to turn away. The phone rang as I was leaning over to label the last of the care kit boxes stacked in the corner of the Welcome Project's small office. Outside the window, the sky was a heavy gray, thin sheets of rain drifting like smoke, reflecting my silhouette in a room filled with items ready to be sent out, soft blankets, handwritten letters, snacks, and cards saying welcome home in many different styles of handwriting. My phone screen lit up, showing my mother's number. I stared at those familiar digits, feeling as though a thin wire ran from that phone straight through my chest, only this wire hadn't carried anything but emptiness for a long time. I let the third, then the fourth ring pass, until it went silent. A voicemail notification appeared. I pressed play. Her voice came through, smaller and slower than I remembered, with a slight catch at the end of each sentence. I don't know how to help you. I thought you didn't want us there. After that came a long pause, so long I could hear the ticking of a clock somewhere in her house through the phone. Then the sound cut off, sudden as a breath being held too long and then stopped. The next day, checking my email, I saw a notification for a new donation. The amount wasn't large, but it was precise enough for me to know instantly. The note field held just a few words, for the next pickup. No sender's name, no contact information. But I knew. Only Mark would write it that way. I sat there in front of my computer, my hand resting on the mouse without clicking. A year ago, I probably would have called my mother immediately, texted Mark a thank you, let myself believe this was the first step toward things going back to how they were. But now, the only thing I felt was a cold clarity. I didn't reply, not because I was still angry. Anger is just a flame that burns and then dies, leaving only ash. What remains after everything isn't hate, it's truth. I no longer needed it. I didn't need late explanations. I didn't need compensation sent the long way around. I didn't need proof that they had done something to make up for the time they abandoned me. I had found people who stood beside me without being called. People who didn't wait to be exposed before deciding to show up. And once you've known what it's like to be welcomed with true presence, you stop waiting at the doors that once closed in your face. The memorial took place on a cool autumn afternoon, the sky a pale gray as though dusted with a fine layer of ash. Wind moved through the line of flags at the entrance, making the fabric snap with a steady sound, like the slow heartbeat of someone trying to stay calm. Rows of chairs were set neatly, draped in white cloth, with a simple wooden podium at the front, next to a large wreath of red carnations and white lilies, their scent faint in the air. When the coordinator called my name, a light round of applause rose, polite, but not loud enough to drown out the wind. I stood, feeling as if each step toward the podium carried the weight of everything I'd been through since that life-changing call. My fingers brushed the notes I had prepared, but as I lifted my head, I knew I wouldn't need them. I began by telling them about Liam. His smile, that even when tired could make me believe everything would be all right. The letters he sent from places I had to find on a map, each one starting with, "Are you okay?" I told them about the last time we spoke on video, static breaking into his words, but still I heard him clearly, "If anything ever happens to me, don't let silence win." I spoke about silence, not the kind born of respect, but of absence, of the empty spaces where there should have been presence. I didn't mention the cold messages, didn't describe the hours alone at the airport. I simply let each sentence flow, slowly, like laying stones along a path, so that anyone who had ever been left behind could walk it and know they were not alone. When I stepped down, the wind had eased, but the air was still thick with something unnamed. My gaze swept the crowd and, in the last row near a large tree, I saw them. My mother and Mark. They didn't sit, but stood apart, like latecomers hoping not to draw attention. My mother's arms were folded, her eyes on the ground, her shoulders trembling under a thin coat. Mark stood beside her, hands deep in his pockets, his eyes pointed toward me but never meeting mine. The distance between us was only a few dozen steps, but it felt like the span of a lifetime, built from the times they hadn't shown up, the words never spoken, the chances gone forever. I didn't nod, didn't smile, didn't signal that I saw them. I let the distance speak for itself. And what it said was louder than any words. Some gaps, once formed, can never be closed, even if we stand in the same afternoon, under the same sky. When I left the memorial, I walked slowly, as if to memorize every face, every gaze, every hand that had touched my shoulder and said, "I understand." I realized that closure doesn't come from a late apology, nor from gestures sent the long way round. It comes the moment you stop sacrificing for those who have repeatedly left you, and stop waiting for them to become what they've never tried to be. I had found my new family, not by blood, but by shared emptiness, shared loss, and, more importantly, by a shared commitment to never let anyone stand alone. They are the ones who will appear, even uncalled. They are the arms at the arrival's gate, the handwritten signs, the eyes warm enough to drown out the cold voice of the airport PA. If I could take only one truth from all this, it's this: you don't rebuild by waiting for them to change. You rebuild by becoming what they never were. And once you stand firm in that truth, you'll understand that some doors close not so you can knock again, but so you can turn away and walk toward the ones already open, waiting for you to step through. If this story has touched you, subscribe to the channel, like the video, and share it so those standing alone will know they are not. And I want to ask you, have you ever had the moment when you realized family isn't always blood, but the people who stand beside you without needing to be called? Leave your answer and the lesson you learned, because maybe your story is exactly what someone out there needs to take their next step.